The following video and continued growth of this channel are made possible by your support over on patreon.com/616entertainment. Sign up today at any level you choose and help bring these brand new projects to life. Or if you're looking for a brand new t-shirt, maybe stop by prowrestlingtees.com/616entertainment. I got you covered. We closed out the history of UFC video games part 3 looking at the final installment of the Undisputed franchise. Amongst Undisputed 3's many highlights, none shined brighter than Pride Mode, where we were allowed to step out of the Octagon and into the ring. Grand Prix tournaments with stomps to the face, soccer kicks, oh, it's all perfectly legal. But this wasn't the first video game appearance of Japan's biggest and best mixed martial arts promotion. To experience that, we'd have to turn back the clock nearly 10 years from Undisputed 3's release. And today, we'll do that. But that's not all. Pride FC on the PlayStation 2 wasn't the only MMA video game released without the Ultimate Fighting Championships branding. In 2010, EA Sports would get into the fight with their own game, EA Sports MMA. 2011 would see the debut of Supremacy MMA, a much darker, grittier title from Kung Fu Factory. The scene was hot, even outside of the UFC. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into here today. Welcome to the History of UFC Video Games Part 4, Uncaged Competition. Oh, what's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian, and I want to thank you for joining me here today. Now, is it strange to cover 0 UFC-branded video games in a series called The History of UFC Video Games? Yeah, probably. But I want to step away from the big license for a minute. I want to walk outside of the mainstream and focus on some of the true greats of the genre. And some of the biggest pieces of trash you've ever seen in your life. So if you're on board with that, stick around. If not, you can go find something else to do. I don't care. Let's get down to business. Up first when it comes to Uncaged Competition, I want to take a look at 2003's Pride FC on the PlayStation 2. We talked about Pride last time, the WCW to the UFC's WWF, the biggest martial arts promotion to ever come out of Japan. Famous for talent of the highest level and the lowest level. Infamous for absolute freak show fights that would never be sanctioned anywhere else in the world. God bless them, you know. Pride Fighting Championships, exclusive to the PlayStation 2, was developed by Anchor Inc. Whoa. Anchor Inc. again? The same team that made the first UFC game on the Dreamcast? Yes, sir. The mediocre UFC sequels on the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, released between 2002 and 2004, those were all developed by Opus and Dream Factory. Anchor Inc. took that foundation they created on the Dreamcast and signed a deal with Pride. Who would publish this Pride game? How about THQ? Yeah, way before THQ put pen to paper with the UFC to publish the Undisputed series, they were working with Pride. Small world, right? After looking at the 4 UFC sequels, Sudden Impact and Tap Out 2 and all that, I know what you're thinking. This isn't going to be good. You've been there and done it at this point, right? Well, you're wrong. And oh, how happy I am to tell you you're wrong about this. Pride FC on the PlayStation 2 is awesome, Dan-Dans. This is indeed that Dreamcast gameplay from the first UFC game, but it's polished, it's tight, the controls are responsive, the fighter movements, the striking combinations, the grappling controls, AI behavior, it's all so much better than it has ever been. UFC Sudden Impact feels like pure shit when compared to Pride FC. I'm gonna sit out for a second. Just take a look at this fight between Gary Goodridge and Tom Erickson. The fighters here in Pride FC actually behave the way they're supposed to. If you're fighting Vanderlei Silva, he's going to want to stand and strike. He's going to throw murderous combinations. He's going to try and take your head off. Get in there with Ken Shamrock and you better keep your ankles protected. A wild man like Enson Inoue, look, if your reflexes aren't sharp, he's gonna catch you with something crazy. The AI actually representing a fighter's personality and style all the way back on the PlayStation 2, this is impressive. The knockouts are impactful because the strikes are sharp and heavy. Submissions can be button mashing, back and forth wars, or you might snatch it up in the blink of an eye. Careful with the button mashing though. I literally developed a blister on my middle finger after playing for like 25 minutes. That's no joke. You guys know me. You know I've kept my old memory cards from my childhood, my teenage years, and yes, I still have my save file from Pride FC. I was 16 going on 17 the last time I played this game, and oh holy hell, I played this game to death. This was my first MMA game where I actually kept track of my win-loss record. I would form storylines in my head for who I fought and why I fought them. If somebody beat me, I'd be like, man, I gotta get a couple wins under my belt so I can get a rematch with that guy. I would go to my family computer and create these tables that looked as close as humanly possible to SureDog's website. I wish I still had that PC so I could show you these old tables and we could go through my win-loss record, but this was a long time ago. This was 2006 and 2007. That PC worked very hard for me, you know, tip of the cap to an old legend. I don't even know what happened to that computer, to be honest with you. And do you ever do that, by the way? Do you ever look back fondly on an inanimate object like it was an old friend of yours? Or is it just me? Should I go to the hospital? So no, I don't have that PC, but I do have my original save file with my original created fighter. Wow, this is a blast from the past, Dandans. I've been away from the Pride ring for 16 years. The question on everybody's mind is, do I still got it? Yeah, I still got it. And yes, that's a straight Frankensteiner. No, this is not possible in mixed martial arts. A Frankensteiner is a professional wrestling maneuver that requires a ton of coordination and cooperation from your opponent to pull off, but Pride was silly, so what the hell? There were also several worked fights in Pride. Did you know that? Pro wrestler Nobuhiko Takada's fight against Mark the Hammer Coleman from Pride 5 back in 1998 is 100% a work. To be totally clear, Pride itself was not fake. Very few fights were rigged, dirty, worked, fake, gimmicked, predetermined, etc. But there were a few. If you're asking how I know, number one, just watch the fight. Watch Coleman allow himself to get kicked and sell the kicks. Watch Coleman hilariously bend down to present his forehead for soft strikes from Takada. And then watch Coleman theatrically reach out for help before tapping to Takada's heel hook, which isn't applied properly and isn't putting any torque on the joint at all. Or just listen to Coleman himself or his training partners come out and admit it years later. Either way. So yeah, a Frankensteiner is nothing. On the topic of created fighters though, I'm not the only custom fighter on the roster. I totally forgot about this, but I also made my own versions of Randy Couture, Mirko Cro Cop, and more. And honestly, I think I did a pretty damn good job on these. One of the many things that made Pride so special, one of the many things that set it apart from the UFC, was its style of presentation. Pride entrances were unbelievable. Their Grand Prix tournaments were grueling tests of will, and both of these key ingredients of the Pride formula are here in the game. When playing a Grand Prix tournament, each fighter has their own hype video that plays before their entrance. These entrances are full length, they're meticulously animated, and they're fantastic. The Texas Crazy Horse Heath Herring comes out with his trench coat and cowboy hat like he's the Undertaker. Gilbert Ivel's suspenders and sunglasses make his dancing look like $1,000,000. It's all here. I haven't mentioned it yet, but how about these graphics, right? This is a PS2 game from 2003, and it looks damn good, even today. This is a lame thing to say, but it's true. The game looks even better on my TV than it does through this recording, I assure you. And that's a frustrating thing to try and convey because there's no way for you to actually see it, you know? There is a way for you to hear the Pride Ladies ring introductions, though.
In the red corner, from the USA, Ken Shamrock! And the winner is, by a knockout, Champion!
Winning a Grand Prix tournament sees the champion celebrate in the ring in front of the sold-out Saitama Super Arena in Japan. The confetti cascades from the sky as the coaches and trainers and even our opponent congratulate us on the victory. The massive trophy and championship belt are awarded. We pose for the photographers at ringside. Honestly, I appreciate how cool this is so much more now than I did as a teenager. This is perfect. This feels huge. It feels like an event. Pride FC hit the PlayStation 2 in February of 2003, meaning this dropped between UFC Throwdown and UFC Tapout. I don't think I have to say this, but I will. Pride FC is so much better than either of them. For my money, up until the release of UFC 2009 Undisputed, this was the best MMA video game ever made. Pride FC reviewed very well, earning great scores from nearly every major outlet. According to my research, the game even sold around 300,000 copies, meaning this non-UFC branded video game outsold every UFC game outside of Throwdown. Moving away from the UFC branding doesn't mean we're only going to look at games that sold 12 copies at half price. Pride FC moved units. It reviewed better than any of the UFC sequels, and honestly, it holds up far better than any of them too. Pride Fighting Championships may have been purchased and closed down by the UFC in 2007, but there's a phrase that is still repeated amongst old school Pride fans to this day. Pride never die. Through my save file, through this video, and through the hearts of Pride fans around the world, it still rings true. I think we'll all be saying it forever. Pride never die. There is another Pride video game on the PlayStation 2 called Pride Grand Prix 2003, and I actually do own a copy of it, but it was never released here in North America. How was I able to play it? Well, when I was a teenager, I installed a flip top with Swap Magic on my PlayStation 2 Slim. And I did so that I could play Pride Grand Prix 2003 and Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, which is a legendary wrestling video game, if you didn't know. I did all of that work and I printed out like a 350-page guide so that I could translate Fire Pro Returns. And then less than a year later, they localized Fire Pro for North America. Dan's the second chapter here on the history of UFC video games, Part 4, Uncaged Competition, is going to look at EA Sports MMA, a game that I have a tremendous affinity for, a game that I have already covered more in depth than anyone ever has here on YouTube. Rather than rewriting, re-editing, and recreating a video that I've already done in the past, I'm actually going to take that video and drop it right here. Now, if you've already seen The Life and Death of EA Sports MMA, the video that I released January 7th, 2022, feel free to skip ahead to Chapter 3. Or, if you've never seen it, you are in for a ride. In 2010, mixed martial arts was booming. All-time greats Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre were in their absolute prime, turning away all challengers to their thrones more often than not in spectacular fashion. Former WWE superstar Brock Lesnar won the UFC Heavyweight Championship, and with his arrival came an injection of attitude the likes of which the very real world of mixed martial arts had never seen. But MMA wasn't monopolized by the Ultimate Fighting Championship, no sir. The California-based Strikeforce were running events on Showtime and even CBS, showcasing the likes of Fedor Emelianenko and Brett Rogers to an audience of over 5.4 million viewers. Dream, a Japanese promotion born from the ashes of Pride FC, were drawing a crowd of nearly 50,000 to the Saitama Super Arena. The business of mixed martial arts was exploding on television, on pay-per-view, and for the first time in forever, in the digital realm of video games. The worldwide industry leader, the UFC, had made its home console debut on the Sega Dreamcast in late 2000. UFC 2009 wasn't perfect by any means, don't get me wrong, but it represented evolution. MMA fans finally had a video game that actually resembled their favorite sport, rather than a rock'em sock'em punch-a-mania that felt more like Ready to Rumble boxing than it did Fight Night. And speaking of Fight Night, when would EA Sports step into the cage? As I stated at the top, in 2010, MMA was growing exponentially, and being the biggest sports dev team out there, you'd have to imagine that EA had their eyes on such a hot commodity, right? And while the UFC were exclusively aligned with THQ and Yuke's, their aforementioned competitors, both Strikeforce and Dream, were wide open. EA Sports MMA was announced in 2009, and on the spot, UFC President Dana White declared war, going as far as to state that any UFC fighter who signed their likeness over to EA Sports would be blacklisted by the promotion for life. Which was funny, seeing as though UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture, who would headline the upcoming UFC pay-per-view event, would be featured on EA MMA's cover art. This is already juicy, but trust me, this is only the beginning. We've got a ton to cover here today. This is the life and death of EA Sports MMA. There's no better place to start than the very beginning, right? So who the hell made this game? You're thinking, it's EA Sports MMA, you moron. EA Sports made it. Listen, pal, EA Sports is the big umbrella. There are several huge development teams underneath that umbrella. It's not the same people making Madden, NHL, FIFA, UFC, and F1 every year. How the hell do you think they'd cram all that into 365 days? EA Tiburon, one of the teams underneath the EA Sports umbrella, are the ones responsible for EA MMA. They're also the Madden team to this very day. Hell, it was EA Tiburon who gave us NFL Street 1, 2, and 3. And Superman Returns, the final Superman video game ever developed, all the way back in 2006. How's that for a little trivia? What the hell was I talking about? Oh yeah, EA Sports MMA. Electronic Arts are elite in the video game industry. It goes without saying, right? EA are big enough that they have the exclusive rights to all simulation-based NFL video games. Madden is the king of the castle, whether you like it or not. EA had Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, they even have the top-of-the-line hockey franchise out there. Take-Two Interactive shut down their NHL 2K series back in 2010. Even 2K Sports were like, you know what? Never mind. Just take hockey. We're done. EA's dominance in the sports scene begs the question. How is it that back in 2007, the UFC wound up signing with THQ? We know nowadays EA UFC is the premier MMA video game on the market, so why didn't this relationship blossom at the start of MMA's boom period? It's a funny story, actually. According to UFC president Dana White, he approached EA Sports when he first began his video game crusade. That 5-year MMA video game drought, Dana wasn't taking it laying down. He knew his company was big money, and he wanted a major partner to help put together a video game that would do justice to the biggest MMA promotion in the world. EA Sports shut him down, and they shut him down hard. At the UFC 100 press conference in July of 2009, shortly after the announcement of EA Sports MMA, White told the media, "I've been in the trenches for almost 10 years, and I've been dealing with all these businesses, and EA was one of them. EA Sports told us, 'You're not a real sport. We wouldn't touch this thing. We want nothing to do with this. We put our asses on the line, THQ and the UFC, to make a video game deal in the worst economy in the world. We go out there and do this thing, and it's successful, and now fucking EA Sports wants to do a video game.' Really? That's not what you told us a year and a half ago." The tirade continued, but I think you get the point. UFC 2009 Undisputed was a hit. He's right about that. Across the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, the game sold over 2 million units and reviewed well. The decision had been made, the contract had been signed, and now the fight was on. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't whether or not EA actually spit in Dana White's face. The question was, could EA Sports hold their own in the cage? The first trailer for EA Sports MMA was shown in November of 2009. Not on an E3 stage, not on a video game showcase event, no. It aired on CBS as a part of the Strikeforce Fedor vs. Rogers event. The trailer pitted the two heavyweight competitors against each other in the digital realm right before their main event showdown. The in-game models were impressive, the animations were smooth, and my personal hype level skyrocketed. I wanted to play as the legendary Fedor Emelianenko, who, if you're not an MMA fan, damn. Fedor was like the MMA Mike Tyson when he was in his prime. And I don't mean he was an incredibly skilled boxer. I mean he was just a war monster. Knockout power? Check. Extremely high-level grappling skills? Check. An untouchable, practically scary aura surrounding him? Check. Fedor was called the last emperor for a reason, man. And that's when my wheels really started to turn. Sure, playing as Fedor would be cool, but could I beat Fedor? God, I remember thinking, I need this game right here, right now. Let's skip the slow trickle of information leading up to release and jump straight into the big stuff. EA MMA's roster filled out in a big way. International stars like Fabricio Verdum, Shinya Aoki, Jacare Souza, Gegard Mousasi, and more lended major hardcore credibility. Former UFC stars like Renato Babalu Sobral, Dan Henderson, Andrei Arlovsky, and Nick Diaz caught the eyes of the modern fans. Legendary fighters like Bas Rutten, Ken Shamrock, and Rickson Gracie held down the nostalgia front, and right on the cover, holy hell, Fedor Emelianenko and Randy the Natural Couture, who was actively signed to the UFC. How the hell was Randy able to appear in EA MMA? Well, he never signed his likeness rights over to the UFC, which prohibited him from appearing in their video games, but he didn't like the UFC's specifics when it came to likeness rights. But when EA Sports knocked on Randy's door and waved that Madden money around, well, now you've got a UFC Hall of Famer as your EA Sports MMA cover star. And again, if you're not an MMA fan, Fedor and Couture squaring off on the cover art here was huge. In 2008, when Randy was the UFC heavyweight champion, he campaigned for the UFC to sign Fedor, with the goal being a mega main event showdown. For several reasons, it never happened. So Randy did what anyone would do. This fight meant so much to him and his legacy that he retired from the UFC in an attempt to break his contract so that he could go sign with a promotion who would reach an agreement with Fedor. Couture versus Fedor had to happen. But that's not really how contracts work, so this caused a massive lawsuit between Couture and the UFC, and the super fight never happened. EA Sports MMA positioned itself as the only way to live out the Dream Showdown, which, in my mind, is brilliant. I mean, it worked on me. So, we've gotten this far, we've set the scene. What does EA MMA's gameplay look like? What does it feel like? I figure instead of trying to describe it to you, why don't I just show it to you?
Is nowhere near. Wow, that punch has gotta hurt. Oh man, what a shot! And the champion is stunned. Souza takes him down to the canvas with a double leg takedown. That's wrestling 101. Lawler has real.
How on earth is he still standing? That was a massive blow.
Down he goes. Zaromskis cracks him on the head with a second kick. There it is. The ref has stopped the fight. What a beatdown. What a TKO.
Yeah, it's good. Look, one of my favorite aspects of EA MMA was the inclusion of very real danger. Very real one-shot knockout power. If you overextend yourself and get caught with a power shot on the chin, you're done, pal. That's it. You don't get to scramble and try to get it together. No, you're out cold just like that. I loved this. And don't get it twisted, it's not always one and done. It's actually pretty rare, and scrambling to regain your bearings after getting caught and rocked is much more common. But just take a look at these animations, man. Listen to the impact of some of this ground and pound.
Denied on the overhand. Beautifully done. Oh, wow, he's already working him, and the fight's just started. Oh, I can't believe it. The fight is already over. It ends in spectacular fashion via TKO, and here we thought we were just getting started.
In this respect, EA Sports MMA put UFC Undisputed to shame. Seriously. On the submission front, EA went out of their way to avoid the much maligned submission control system of their competitor. UFC Undisputed introduced the shine mechanic, where, in order to apply submissions, a player was forced to rotate the right stick as fast as humanly possible for upwards of 30 seconds to a minute. Players complained of broken controllers and even blisters on their palms due to this control scheme. EA Sports opted instead for a simplified system. One button. You press one button to initiate a submission, and if your opponent doesn't block it in time, the fight is on. In this second stage, you once again need just one button to battle back and forth. It's one part rhythm-based and one part cat and mouse. You want to string together as many presses as possible without interruption from your opponent, while also managing your stamina meter. It's simple, it's effective, and the X-ray feature here is awesome. Chokes are handled differently. In a choke submission, you want to use the right stick to find and chase the sweet spot, which is hidden from you until you find it. If this sounds familiar to you, even though you've never played EA MMA, it's because in 2012, UFC Undisputed 3 would straight up steal this mechanic. I did kind of launch into knockouts and submissions without talking about the striking controls, didn't I? Alright, let's circle back. If there's anything that turned off many players who gave EA Sports MMA a shot, it was the striking controls. UFC Undisputed mapped your limbs to the face buttons, much like your favorite fighters of the past. EA MMA mapped your punches and kicks to the right analog stick. Flicking diagonally up throws a simple jab. Flicking diagonally forward throws a cross. A counterclockwise quarter circle from 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock through a right hook, whereas a clockwise circle from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock throws a left hook. Holding down the R1 button aims whatever strike you're throwing at the body, and holding L2 switches your attack from a punch to a kick. If this sounds extremely complicated, it's because it is. It is when you hear it explained, at least. I would argue that when you have the controller in your hand, it's not as hard to figure out as it sounds, but my argument doesn't matter in the long run, and here's why. This striking system straight up killed EA MMA for many players. It was too hard, and they were out. Game sucks! I disagree strongly, but it is what it is. The real head scratcher is this. EA allows you to go into the options menu and simply switch over to a face button control scheme for striking. This tells me that they internally weren't entirely sold on their own control scheme. If you really believe in your controls, believe in them. Don't allow a secondary simplified option for people who don't want to take the time to learn the proper mechanics. If your control scheme is too complicated for the average player and you know it, throw it out entirely. The ability to switch your striking controls over to the face buttons was a major problem, and here's why. It completely broke the online scene. If your strikes were tied to the face buttons, you could throw punches so much faster than people like me who use the default stick-based system. There was an epidemic in the EA MMA online community centered around body spammers. Body spammers were players who would switch their striking controls over to the face buttons, and right at the start of the fight, they would blitz forward, throwing hook after hook after hook at their opponent's midsection, which would completely deplete their stamina and health bars in the blink of an eye. And if you used the default stick-based striking system, you were practically defenseless to this. This sucked. And if you're watching this and you were a body spammer back in the day, you still suck. You completely ruined the fun of fighting online, and you drove people away from a community that was already small to begin with. Fuck you. I dipped into a negative aspect of the game there for a second, so let's turn it around and put over one of EA MMA's greatest strengths, its presentation. Fighters walk down the ramp on their way to the cage or ring. More on that in a second. Mauro Ranallo and Frank Shamrock provide excellent commentary for your fights.
For many years, it was the fight everyone wanted to see. Well, now it is happening right here, right now. The matchup between two MMA legends, Randy the Natural Couture and the Last Emperor, Fedor Emelianenko. He has his back, and really he has so many options from here. Of course, option number one is usually that rear naked choke. Uh-oh, he's given up his back, and this could be the beginning of the end.
It's a bad position, Mauro. He's got to get hand control immediately, and he's got to turn and face his opponent.
Jimmy Lennon Jr. gives us the pre- and post-fight announcements. We've got real-world brands like Rockstar Energy and even Showtime on the mat. And you know me. As a belt mark, you bet your ass I appreciate the appearance of several different championship belts. Now, why are there several different championship belts? Well, that's simple. It's because there are several different promotions you can fight for. Look, this isn't called Strikeforce 2010 or whatever the hell else they could have called it. This isn't a one promotion deal. Strikeforce, the number 2 MMA promotion in the world, is indeed present, and that's fantastic, but we've also got a generic version of Dream, Japan's biggest promotion at the time. My favorite part of this is that Dream's fights didn't take place in a cage, but in a ring. Let me tell you how much variety this adds, Dan Dans. My goodness. Bouncing between a cage and a ring is great. But how about the different rule sets? See, Strikeforce doesn't allow elbows on the ground. The unified rules do allow elbows on the ground. So if you want to mount your opponent and rain down elbows, you gotta take your fight to someone else's cage. Maybe an independent promotion, right? And hey, maybe they don't fight in the Strikeforce style hexagon cage. Maybe this indie league uses a circular cage. Japanese MMA rules don't allow grounded elbows, but they do allow soccer kicks to the head and stomps to the face. This level of creativity and variety for every fight you play spices things up in a way I can't even put into words. By the way, not a single UFC video game to this day has allowed for this level of creativity. Not one. And I've got more to gush over. EA Sports put so much love into their presentation that they made sure every fighter has their own stance. In real life, Chuck Liddell and Shogun Rua don't hold the exact same stance and style. Well, in the UFC game, they do. With EA MMA, the developers stated that the players would be able to identify which stance belonged to which fighter, even if it were applied to a generic model. For hardcore combat sports fans like me, This was a dream come true. The fights themselves feel different from the competition as well. UFC Undisputed's clock runs in double time, like you're playing NFL Blitz or something. EA MMA's clock is real time, brother. If you're in a championship fight and you're more of a point fighter, you don't have that knockout power or slick submission game, you better be ready to battle for 25 minutes into a decision, because this is a very real 25 minutes. That may be a little too real for some, but not me. Sign me up for the big time.
Emelianenko with a soccer kick to the head.
A career mode is important for any combat sports game, and in my opinion, there is only one combat sports game ever made with an absolutely perfect career mode. It's called Fight Night Round 4. Your manager approaches you with a list of opponents. One guy might have a losing record. He's not even ranked. The next guy is climbing up the ranks just like you are. He's working on his record and it's a good challenge. Another dude might be like 22-3. He's coming off a loss in a title fight. He's way out of your league. But man, if you could just land that one good shot, all of a sudden, you're a contender. It could be worth the risk. There might not be a single guy you're approached with that you're willing to sign up against. And you don't have to. Just wait for a new batch of opponents. You might fall in the ranks and your popularity will suffer, but you can get that back, right? So, does EA MMA stand up to Fight Night Round 4's arguably perfect career mode? In one word, no. Look, here's the deal. We've got Boss Rutan as our coach. He's fully, and very nicely I might add, voice acted, and he guides us through the cutthroat world of mixed martial arts. He uses his connections to earn us opportunities to train in Thai boxing gyms across the world, or maybe Randy Couture's gym to work on our wrestling. The options here are extremely impressive, and I'd say the same about our career progression. We start off in a podunk little indie promotion, and after stringing a few impressive wins together, a mid-tier league will reach out and offer a contract. At this point, we can head to Brazil and fight in a ring under Vale Tudo rules, or sign with a UK-based operation which adheres to the unified rule set. Making a name for yourself here opens up the big time, and contracts from the Dream Clone Mystic as well as Strikeforce will slide across our desk. Have I used the word variety enough in this retrospective? Goodness gracious. At this point, you're probably wondering where this goes wrong. I stated right at the top that this career mode doesn't stand up to Fight Night Round 4, and here's why. It's the same place where all of the other career modes fall apart. The matchmaking. A duo of completely nonsensical booking and unrealistic rematches drag down an otherwise great gameplay mode. There is absolutely zero reason why I should be rematching a guy with a losing record in just my 4th pro fight. I fought him. I finished him decisively. And the very next fight I'm offered is him again. Why do I have to create storylines in my head to make up for this terrible booking? Oh yeah, he argued that the ref stopped the fight too soon, so they booked a rematch. Yeah, it's personal this time. Why do I have to do that? This, coupled with taking on the same guys sometimes 5 to 6 times across your career, completely pull you out of the otherwise very positive experience. If you know me, you know I am notoriously a single-player guy. I so rarely jump into a game's online modes. But I'm also a big-time trophy hunter. I made the trophy list for Retromania Wrestling. Let me tell you, I knocked it out of the park. EA MMA's trophy list required a player to level all the way up online. And when I tell you that this took ages, man, it's hard to put into words what a long and arduous journey this was. But let me set the scene. I'll do my best. First of all, I wasn't alone in this endeavor. I mention him all the time, but my good buddy Bathroom Money Tim Ewers was also in pursuit of this elusive platinum trophy. It was a different time. It was 2010. It was before full-time jobs, before mortgages, before kids. It was 2 guys hanging out, staying up all hours of the night, both on our own separate PS3s hooked up to our own separate TVs, drinking fatal amounts of sugary sodas, and in Tim's case, chain smoking cigarettes between fights. I swear to God, he'd keep a cigarette in his mouth for an entire round because he didn't have time to set it into the ashtray. It was an incredible sight to see. We'd spend all night fighting anybody we were matched up against online. Sometimes you'd have a bottom of the barrel body spammer to deal with. Other times you'd have a back and forth battle with somebody at your same skill level. And every here and there, you get matched up with somebody like Serdov, who finished as one of the best EA MMA players in the world. A guy who is still on my friends list to this day because we used to get together to have practice fights. And no, I never beat him. Imagine this going on forever. Or, I mean, it felt like forever. White belt, green belt, on and on and on. And after you earned your red belt and you thought you were done, no sir, you just earned the ability to compete in the Masters division. Rinse and repeat those nights of Mountain Dew Code Red, cigarettes, and no sleep for months and months on end. It sounds silly now. This comment section could easily fill up with, "You guys sound like losers." But let me tell you something, man. I think I can count on my hands how many times I've had that much fun. And the story doesn't end there. This isn't just a, "Hey, what a good time" tale. No. Tim and I were active on the EA MMA message boards, which were frequently visited by the actual developers of the game. We'd get on there and bust balls saying, "Do you have any idea how long it takes to level up in this game? We want double XP, damn it." And guess what? We'd get a response back. "You got it. Double XP starts tonight and runs through the weekend." We were blown away. This was 2010. Who the hell had this kind of access to the developers of the games they were playing back then? This was unheard of, at least to us. So what did we do? We went out, we bought a bunch of garbage to eat, and we marathoned our way through a weekend of double XP. It was tremendous. There is a bittersweet ending to this story, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's put a pin in the Platinum Trophy chase for a second so I can tell you about the unbelievably forgotten EA Sports live broadcast feature. In short, this was a live event taking place exclusively inside of EA MMA, hosted by the developers of the game. Real players from around the world were selected to compete in front of the entire community, and before the bell rang, they would literally get on camera and cut a promo. This was out of control. It feels like a fever dream looking back on it now. I never had the chance to compete, but man, watching someone talk smack like they were The Rock, only to get completely dominated and knocked out cold inside of 60 seconds, it was a one-of-a-kind thing, Dan-Dans. If all this sounds great so far and you're thinking, "Man, I can't believe I missed out on this whole thing. I want to check this game out. I need to see for myself what makes EA MMA so special. Why wasn't anybody talking about this game? Why did none of my friends say, 'Hey dude, you need to check out EA MMA'? There's a quick and easy answer to that question, unfortunately. Nobody bought EA Sports MMA. The game reviewed very well, pulling higher scores than UFC Undisputed 2010 on some outlet scales. The game was showcased on CBS, on pay-per-view. It had the EA Sports marketing juggernaut behind it, but it didn't matter. Remember at the very top of this video when I mentioned that UFC 2009 sold over 2 million copies and set the world on fire? Hell, that game was the catalyst for EA MMA even existing in the first place, so you know it was a big deal. Get ready for this. EA Sports MMA, in its first month on the market, sold 45,000 units. 45,000. Doug Kreutz of Cohen & Company labeled EA MMA as dead on arrival, which are 3 words you never want to hear in regards to a brand new IP. I was shocked to see how poorly EA MMA was selling, but I mean, I should have seen the writing on the wall. On those nights that Tim and I were grinding out the levels online, we were running into the same players over and over and over again. We knew some of them by name. Tim would turn to me and say, "Oh, I got Camaro Z28 again. I'm gonna kill him. Again." The player base was small. Very small. So small that the servers, which hosted all of the game's online functionality, were shut down less than 2 years after the game's launch. Remember that bittersweet ending I mentioned regarding the journey to the Platinum Trophy? I remember reading the message board post informing all of us hardcores that the EA MMA plug was getting pulled. There were posts from players and developers going back and forth, and I'll never forget reading the words. From now until our final day of operation, April 13th, 2012, we're instituting 10 times XP. Go and get those platinums. It was like he was speaking directly to Tim and I. We had badgered this poor guy for a year, busting balls about this ridiculously long grinding process, and obviously, it made an impact on him. He knew we wouldn't have time to see the journey to its end, so he stepped in and made a difference. He made it possible for us. That is something I'll truly never forget. If you're watching this video, dude, thank you. That was a big deal to us. And that EA MMA Platinum Trophy, which I earned on October 1st, 2011, is still the rarest trophy in my collection of nearly 7,000. Thanks to online databases like psnprofiles.com, it's cataloged forever that I was just the 20th person in the world to earn that trophy. 0.1% of all players have this one in their collection, and with the servers having been shut down for nearly 10 years now, this is an extremely exclusive club that is no longer joinable. God damn. What a journey. EA Sports MMA, at the end of the day, was a commercial failure. The game sold very, very poorly. It reviewed well, and to the hardcores out there, like myself, it's still held in high regard. I'll never forget standing in line at GameStop at midnight. There were maybe 35, 40 people lined all the way out onto the sidewalk to pick up their pre-order of Fallout New Vegas. There were stacks behind the counter of PS3 and 360 copies of New Vegas. You'd walk up to the cashier, they'd reach out for your pre-order receipt while asking, 360 or PS3? You got your game and went home looking forward to a brand new adventure in the war-torn, post-apocalyptic world of Fallout. When it was my turn at the counter, the cashier asked, PS3 or 360? I replied, EA MMA. Behind the skyscraper-esque towers of Fallout, there sat my lone PlayStation 3 copy of EA Sports MMA. I grabbed my game and went home, looking forward to a brand new adventure in the Strikeforce cage, the Japanese ring, and the high-octane world of mixed martial arts. It is worth noting that in December of 2010, 2 months after EA MMA's abysmal launch, EA Sports Associate Editor Jeff Ecker confirmed to Figure 4 Online, and I quote, "There is definitely going to be an EA Sports MMA 2. In some ways, this was a lie. In others, it wasn't. On June 17th, 2014, MMA gamers were treated to the release of EA Sports UFC. And after all that talk, after declaring war on EA Sports in 2009 and threatening to blacklist any UFC fighter who signed over their likeness, UFC President Dana White was included as a playable fighter in EA Sports UFC 3, forever proving that time and lots of money heals all wounds. Oh my goodness gracious, Dan Dans, there it is. The life and death of EA Sports MMA. You know, there are very few games out there that I can say I was there on day one, and I stood on the deck of that ship, saluting the skies as we sank down to the abyss. EA Sports MMA holds a very special place for me, and this is a retrospective that I've wanted to make for a long time. Oh man, I am so happy to have those memories, and I'm so happy to have shared those memories with all of you. You know, what's really cool is that 3 of the biggest names behind the development of EA Sports MMA actually saw that video, reached out to me, and joined me here on the channel for an interview that went nearly 2.5 hours long. Shout out to Nick, Preston, and Jason. Link in the description if you'd like to check out that interview after this. These guys have stories for days. Stories that include tracking dog shit into Randy Couture's house. I'm not kidding. Passion. That's what EA Sports MMA had. Now, sure, it was a financial failure, but that happens. Not all of the best things draw the most money. Fight Club was a financial failure. The Iron Giant was a theatrical bomb. These things happen. Our third and final topic here on the history of UFC video games, part 4, doesn't exactly fall into that category. Supremacy MMA was released in June of 2011. Developed by Kung Fu Factory, the team behind Mortal Kombat Unchained on the PSP, and even the Wii port of Mortal Kombat Armageddon, it should be no surprise that this title brings the pain. The realistic sports simulations of Undisputed and EA Sports MMA are outta here, mister. In place of realism and a professional atmosphere are dark, dingy, dirty cages with barbed wire around the top. There's no Brock Lesnar, no Randy Couture, no Fedor Emelianenko. Instead, there's Jack Saxon and Pierre Matisse. If you're a fight fan and you're confused, it's because Jack Saxon is actually Brent Cooper. Pierre Matisse is played by kickboxing star Joe Schilling. Why are these fighters using fake names? Who knows? It could have something to do with the supremacy stories, which are not tales of white nationalist conquest, despite how it may sound. No, they're multi-part arcade ladders. More on that later. The fighters playing characters for the story theory doesn't really hold up when Jerome LeBanner and Jens Pulver are here, and they're just themselves. I don't know, Dan. I don't know. What I do know is this. Supremacy MMA is an awful, awful game. Why is the game awful, you ask? How is it awful? I'm glad you posed those questions, and I'll do my absolute best to put it into words. To put it bluntly, the buttons just don't do what they're supposed to do. Half the time when you try to walk, your feet just stay put, like you're glued to the floor. The striking... Okay, hold on. I played through the tutorial before jumping headlong into gameplay because I wanted to have some semblance of an idea how to control my fighter. This might be the worst tutorial I have ever seen in my life. They'll throw a prompt at you, and whether you actually clear the lesson or not, they'll just throw another one at you. Look at this. Press circle right before you hit the ground to soften your blow. Okay. Is this guy going to... Is he gonna knock me down so that I can try that? No? Okay. So what do I do? Oh, I guess I'll just do this now. Supremacy MMA might honestly be the worst PlayStation 3 game I've ever played. I'm serious. Why is it that executing a submission move doesn't end a fight? It just hurts. Why did I let go of the hold? Why would I not crank it harder? Oh man. Getting an opponent to the ground and unleashing punches practically means you've won the fight. It takes forever to drain your opponent's health, but I'd say 94% of the time, they won't even make an attempt to stand up or even change their position on the ground. Look at this. It's comical. Supremacy Stories, the terribly named story mode we touched on earlier, has us stepping into the shoes of a fighter of our choosing and playing through their story. And I'm being generous with that explanation. The only story comes from these cheap-looking, flat, repetitive motion comics. This game does have a feature not found in any MMA game since Sudden Impact, though. It's got female fighters. Supremacy MMA touts its female fighters right on the box art. Kung Fu Factory were extremely proud to feature so many women in an MMA game. Every female fighter even has their own supremacy story. All 2 of them. Yeah, that's it. Felice Herrig and Michelle Gutierrez. Their story modes, as you might imagine, are just them fighting each other. Look at the intro to Michelle's story. It's dark and fucked up, but I cannot help but laugh at it.
Did I mention I was just coming out of a divorce? Yeah, that happened. Also, this was the same year my mother died of cancer.
Jesus Christ. If there's one other thing that'll have you saying Jesus Christ, it's the fact that this game celebrates the athletes suffering horrific injuries. The main selling point for Supremacy MMA was the idea that you can break your opponent's bones. Kicks can literally break your opponent's leg in half at the knee, effectively ending their entire career. A joint lock to end a fight can snap an arm like a twig. Look, Supremacy MMA is the type of game to say anything's possible in the cage. Meanwhile, Jens Pulver is listed as a boxer, meaning he cannot throw kicks at all. Anything is possible, except for, like, most things. You know what this game is? Supremacy MMA is the backyard wrestling of mixed martial arts video games. That's the perfect analogy for it. And over-promising, under-delivering, hey, that's kind of cool on paper, but, oh, it's dog shit in practice, idea that probably shouldn't have even been released in the first place. It should be no shocker that Supremacy MMA reviewed terribly and sold even worse. I mean, you're not shocked by that, are you? You can't be. Can you believe that this has a PlayStation Vita port? I love the Vita. I've been a Vita Island resident since day one, and it hurts me that Supremacy MMA is the only mixed martial arts game on the platform. Some may ask why I'm not covering 2012's Bellator MMA Onslaught in this video. Because Bellator, at a certain point, became the number 2 MMA promotion in the world. Well, I'm not covering it because Onslaught was developed by Kung Fu Factory and is pretty much just a reskin of Supremacy MMA. If you can believe it, it has even fewer arenas and only 8 fighters in the entire game. 8. Single digits. Yeah, we won't be wasting any time on this. I will quickly put over the World of Mixed Martial Arts series, though. A text-based, PC-exclusive sim that allows the player to run their own company, sign talent, put together pay-per-view deals, book fights. Basically, you can be the Dana White of your own promotion. I've probably sunk more than 1,000 hours into this series. I'm not kidding. It's one of my all-time favorite video games. Seriously, it's about as nerdy as it gets, but hey, that's the real deal. When it comes to mixed martial arts video games outside of the UFC, we've got a pretty good deal of variety. Pride FC was damn fun when it came out, with a level of presentation that was ahead of its time. EA Sports MMA, for me, is still a blast. There are features in EA MMA that I wish would be present in the upcoming UFC 5. That's how much I love that game. And Supremacy MMA, oh boy. I mean, there has to be a worst in every category, right? Well, in Supremacy MMA, we found our rock bottom. Oh, there it is, Dan Dans. Thank you for joining me for the History of UFC Video Games Part 4, Uncaged Competition. Next time out, we wrap things up with the History of UFC Video Games Part 5, Changing the Game, where we are going to go deep on the EA Sports branded UFC titles. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, please consider supporting me over on patreon.com/616entertainment. I'm a one-man crew. I write these scripts, I shoot these videos, I edit these videos, I upload them. It's all me. And if you want to support a one-man crew, Patreon is the place to do it. Thank you very much. Until next time, I love ya, and I'll see you soon. You can be a human or a fucking alien or a ghost, of man, woman, whatever you want. The titles.
Oh my God!
Goodness! Frankensteiner to the outside.